All right, well, good morning. We are going to get started. It's about 3 after 12. We may have some more participants trickle in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for joining us for the webinar today, Unlocking the Secrets to a Successful Exit. We hope the content presented today will be beneficial for you on your journey to planning your own exit. So throughout the webinar today, please feel free to ask questions at any time by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will have some time at the end for Randy to answer questions, but you don't need to feel like you need to hold off. As you think of questions, please go ahead and submit those, and then we'll just be compiling those for Randy to answer at the end. So just a little bit about us at NuVescor. Our mission is to help manufacturing business owners reach their personal and financial goals through the sale of their business. We provide comprehensive services, including business valuations, market analysis, financial modeling, and transaction facilitation. A little bit about our speaker today, Randy Rua. I'm introducing him today because I probably know him better than anyone else does. Randy and I have been life partners. We've been married for almost 23 years. We have 2 sons, and we've been working together for 13 years. Randy is the president of NuVescor. And a lot of people, when we tell them what we do, we help people sell their business, they say, oh, that's interesting. How did you guys get into that business? So Randy has a degree in mechanical engineering from Calvin University in Grand Rapids. And he started out in manufacturing as a design engineer. And then he decided to go back to school. He got his MBA from the University of Southern California with concentration in entrepreneurship. And a few years after graduating, he and his father decided to go and find a business to buy. They ended up purchasing 2 different businesses, merging them together, running them for several years. And then some circumstances changed with his father needing to exit, and so decided to sell that business. In the process of looking for a business to buy and then selling a business to buy, Randy figured out he loved that part. And so not as much running the business, that's why he brought me in, but just really had a passion for helping other people go through that process because he's gone through that process himself. So that is how we ended up with getting into this business. Randy started Rua Associates, and then in 2010, and then in 2016, we were approached by the previous owner of NuVescor. Randy had worked at NuVescor previously, and we purchased NuVescor. So we own both NuVescor and Rua Associates. And today, Randy is going to, present. So go ahead and take it away, Randy.
All right. Thank you, Tammy, for the introduction. And I want to thank all of you for attending this webinar. I was actually very impressed with the number of people who are attending and who have registered for this event. And the reason I'm really impressed by that is I've been doing M&A transactions for almost 20 years, and I find it's very hard to get business owners to take some time to really look at their exit strategy and actually work on planning for that. Most owners end up either they just decide one day they want to sell and they try it and then it doesn't work out and they end up having a failed transaction, or they just wait for something to happen to them or wait for someone to come along. So the proactive approach is few and far between. So again, just really thankful that you're here and that you're thinking this way. Over the last 20 years, I've done about 300 transactions. And during my early years, I worked for 2 different M&A firms. And I saw a lot of failed transactions and a lot of unhappy clients after they have actually completed transactions. So today what we're going to talk about is some of the secrets, are basically how to avoid some of the pitfalls and to ensure that you do have a successful transaction when you go through the process. So before you really look at exiting, one of the things that's really important to do is make sure that you answer 2 key questions. And the first one is looking at, is your business ready to sell? So here we have a tool that you can use that we subscribe to a service. It's called the Value Builder System, and you're able to utilize this free of charge. It gives you a kind of a value range. It also tells you kind of how saleable your business is and how the range of value is dependent on certain factors. So that's something that we can include. And Tammy, I want to make sure that when we send out the exit planning checklist at the end, we also include a link to the Value Builder survey for anybody who wants to participate with that. We take that a bit further in our preparation process, and we do evaluation. We do, your standard evaluation. We have 2 certified valuation analysts on staff, and we'll come up with a very solid value that will work for a bank. It's defendable, by the IRS if you're looking for a transition to family, but it doesn't tell you the value from a market standpoint. So if you're looking at a third-party sale, we typically do what's called a market test, where we actually go out and we test the market and we collect data on what current buyers are looking to pay in the current market environment. But that really answers the question on, is your business ready to sell? And that's something that a lot of business owners are interested in, and we can get them to talk about that. The part that's harder to get into is, are you personally ready to exit? And that's what we're here to focus on today, is talking about the 5-step exit checklist that you can use to kind of help determine your personal readiness and to help get you ready for an exit. So the 5-step plan to exit, here's the 5 steps. I'll walk through them at a high level. So, the first thing we want to do is understand, why are you exiting the business? What is your reasoning behind it? And this is actually probably the number 1 question that buyers ask us all the time. And someone's looking to sell is, why do they want to sell? And the reason that's so important to define the why is it leads right into the type of exit. Because if you try and exit and use a strategy that doesn't align with your why, it typically doesn't work out. And buyers know that, which is the reason that they try to understand that up front. The third step here is to figure out your number. Another common reason that transactions fail is because the purchase price that the seller wants doesn't match the market, or what banks will loan on, or what can be realistically defended with an IRS if it's going to be an internal transfer. So having a number that is realistic and that will actually be successful for the type of exit you want is obviously very important. And then number 4, the post-exit life. And this is more on after the sale. So even if you're successful with the sale itself or the transition itself, you still have to be successful with what happens afterwards in order to consider it a good transaction. And so we'll look at that step. And then the last one, number 5, once you've kind of done the first 4 steps, then you can look at, as a tool called the exit matrix. And you can look at that tool, and that helps you determine, based on the first 4, what might be the best strategy for you. So we'll dive in on step 1 here. So first, getting clear on why. What is the reason? You can categorize the reasons really into 2 different areas. You can do one on push strategies. So these are push reasons. These are things that are pushing the owner out of the business. This is what's making them want to leave. I would say it's what makes them want to run away from the business. And there's pull factors, and pull factors are reasons that the owner wants to leave, things that they're running towards. And it's good to identify these up front and understand them. So on the push side, you might have things, for example, retirement is probably the most common thing you'll hear. Well, I'm ready to retire. And that's really more of a push factor. It's a reason that you're being pushed out of your business. Other reasons could be being bored of the business at this point. It's not exciting anymore, or health reasons, or being burned out or stressed out. There's a variety of factors that could push you out of the transaction. Now, we've had a situation where if you don't match it up with pull factors, then we've had it in the past where some owners, when they get to the finish line, they're not able to actually exit. For example, we had one owner, Bud, who he has an engineering service company, and he was trying to do a transaction. We went through the whole process, got down to the final days of actually closing. This is after a 6-month process of building a buyer pool, negotiating site visits, getting down to multiple proposals, finally getting down to the final buyer, getting down to the purchase agreement. And a week before closing, Bud emails me and says, I don't know if I can sit on the couch all day and look at my wife. And I was like, wow, what a thing to say. And not only that, he copied his wife on that email. So I don't know if they were fighting or what was happening there, but Bud did not like being pushed out of the business. He felt like he was having to sell because it was time to retire. He was 71, and he had nothing really to look forward to. So now, luckily, Bud did turn that around. We did work on some pull factors, and he was able to get excited about building a house on Lake Michigan. And he did end up doing the transaction. It was delayed because we had to put the transaction on hold, but about a month later, we did finish it. But this was an early lesson for me on why you really need to have something to go towards. So some ideas of things to go towards would be, if you want to travel, there's some people that had travel plans that get excited about, or, health is a big issue as you get older. And some people feel like, without having the extra time to stay in shape, that their health will decline. So they look at exiting and look forward to that. Some people actually start a new business or a new venture. So there's a variety of reasons to exit. But if it's all push factors, again, it can be difficult. You want to balance it out with, the push with some pull, and make sure you have some of both. So the way to do that in a start is, make a list of, what are you excited about? Think through what are some things that you could look forward to going to do after the sale is complete. And you can start testing the waters. If it's travel, start taking some trips. If it's starting something new, start looking into that. But you really want to have that underway, at least a good idea of what you're going to go do to help make it a smooth transition. So once you have your why, the next step is really aligning that with their exit type. So I'm going to go through some of the exit types here. So selling outright to a third party is probably the most common that people think of when they think of selling their business, but there's many other options. One option is recapitalization. Now that's where you have a situation where you're selling part of the company, but not the entire company. And I'll go into an example of that later, but it's an opportunity to take some chips off the table, but still remain engaged. Liquidation is an option that unfortunately occurs as the number one reason people, or number one way that people sell their business. I think most owners think that most sales are happening through actual sale or transition to family or things like that. Actually, liquidation is the highest, and it's because people wait until the business is only worth the asset value. And lately, we've done quite a few liquidation sales in the marketplace with companies who have had very high level of sales, 30 million, 50 million. Now they're down into the $7-8 million range. And that drop in sales so quickly in the last year or two has caused people to have to liquidate. Now we can sell the assets to a buyer, so it's kind of like an outright sale, but you're really only getting asset value. And that works good in manufacturing businesses where there's a lot of assets to sell. And in a lot of these cases, the owners have waited so long that they've already have their net worth they need to retire on. They were just keeping the business because they wanted to keep it. And so when they got liquidated, they were okay with the proceeds. The owners who have businesses like ones we've worked with that are more on the services side, so industrial services like repair and maintenance, engineering services, companies that do like data analytics, things like that, there's really not much to liquidate there because there's not much asset base. Another option would be to bring in a COO or CEO, someone to run the business, or at least take over the day-to-day operations. That can be a good choice. It's hard to find those people, but what happens a lot of times when we're looking to sell a company is we'll come across people who want to buy a business, but they don't really have enough funding. And so they'll end up working for someone as their COO for a while and do a transitional buyout. So there's different ways of looking at that opportunity. Another option is to develop a board of advisors and become the chairman of the board and still have your management team in place, allow you to back off of the day-to-day operations and run it from that standpoint. Transferring to kids is probably the one that a lot of owners would like to do. It's one of the more difficult transactions to complete. There's a variety of reasons for that, but it is one of the most preferred methodologies for transitioning. And then lastly, management buyout. That's a common approach as long as the management team can afford it or the seller is willing to finance quite a bit of the transaction, but it's definitely an option for the right circumstance. So when you're aligning your reasons to sell with your exit options, you're really looking at basically once you figure out what your reasons are, what your why is, then you can look at, okay, what are the options that will meet that reason? And then you take each one of those and we really look at the feasibility of those options. We had a client, his name was Dale. He owns an electronics manufacturing company, and he wanted to have a management team buyout. That was his goal. But the reason that he was looking to exit is he wanted to retire. He wanted to leave the business. He didn't have family to transition it to. He just had the management team, and him and his wife, they wanted to do bed and breakfast in the Bahamas. That was their kind of pulling factor. Well, the problem with the management team buyout was they were not able to get enough capital out of the company that way. They had to sell our finance quite a bit. We did get several bank proposals and we were able to get some financing, but it still wasn't enough to really accomplish their goals. So he had to look at other options for what he wanted to do. So step 3, now you get to the point where you want to figure out your number. So what is the number that you need or want to be able to exit the business? There's a couple of different ways to come up with what your business is worth. We talked about that already. You can do evaluation, you can do market analysis, and you can kind of get a range. We like to put together several scenarios so that you can understand what each option would yield. But then you have to compare that to what you need or what you want. And that is really the key, is matching that up. So first, how do you figure out what you need? One way in retirement, you're really looking at how much money do I need to retire on? And this is a really high level rule of thumb. So one rule of thumb is that you look at, you'll hear financial planners say that 3 to 4% of your investable funds, is kind of what you can count on to be able to use for living expenses. So first you have to determine how much money do I need to fund my lifestyle. And then if you times that by 25, which is kind of using that, 4%, you can kind of come up with, what do you need for a number in order to sell it for in order to meet your goals. And then if you have outside investments that generate some return that you can use for cash flow, then you can see what you actually need net proceeds from the sale of your business. So in this case, if it's $100,000 that you feel you need per year to live on, then you're going to need to sell your business for at least 1.8, assuming that you have 700,000 in other assets that you can utilize. Some people, the reason that they do a sale is they just want to take some chips off the table. They really want to make sure that they can have, some risk taken off the table from their business. So you're looking at what you call a recap. And here you have your before and your after. So what you want to do is say, how much is my business as a percentage of my net worth? And so in this example, if you have a net worth of 5 million and your business is 3.5 million, then you're currently have your business worth 70% of your net worth. So, and if you really want to bring that down to 30%, then you have to look at, okay, what do I have to do that? And so this example shows you that if you would have to basically only be able to keep 42% of the business in order to only have your net worth be 30%. So you'd sell 58%, so it's a majority sale. And I should say that most of the recapitalizations are majority sales. You can find investors and private equity groups that will do a minority purchase, so less than 50%, but it's rare. It's harder to find. There's a lot of equity groups and buyers that will do a majority and allow the owner to keep up to 51%, up to 49%. So in this case, a 58% sale, and then you can see afterwards your net worth of your business part of your net worth is a lot less. One of the things you have to look at though, when you're trying to determine how much have to get out of the business, is you have to look at your net proceeds, not just your sale price. A lot of intermediaries focus on how much money they can get for your business. You'll get quoted a amount, and what we like to do is actually look at transaction scenarios and give you an amount after tax, because that's really what matters. So by the time you have your sale price, and then you pay an M&A fee, you pay some legal fees, maybe accounting fees, if you do some employee thank yous. And by the way, this is a good strategy that really helps boost the value of your business. We've had it before where if a seller is willing to pay employees a stay bonus as a thank you, what happens is, the buyer feels more confident they're going to stay for a year or two, whatever period that stay bonus is. And so they end up paying more for the business because of that de-risking, and you're able to give that to the employees. So it's a great way to get them a bonus. But you have to, after you've tracked all of that, then you have to look at what's left, and then you have to pay your taxes. And so it can be a significantly lower number depending on your tax situation. And the tax situation is negotiable. It's in the transaction. The tax amount you pay can vary greatly depending on how it's structured, how it's negotiated. So it's another good reason to make sure you're comparing proposals between buyers or options, between internal or management buyouts, all your exit strategies. You're looking at it at an after-tax proceeds, because at the end of the day, that's the number that matters. So not only have to think about your proceeds, you also have to think about, are you going to continue to work for the company? And a lot of buyers would like the owner to stay on for a minimum of 6 months, sometimes a couple of years, sometimes I've seen 5 years plus. It depends on the situation, what the seller wants to do. But when you negotiate that, there's a lot of things you got to consider and make sure done properly. Obviously, having a good job description is helpful to know what exactly it is they want you to do, but what are they going to pay? Is there bonuses in place? Is there any long-term incentive options? If they do want you to stay longer, that you can ratchet that up. You also have to look at your severance terms. If they are to terminate early, how does that work? Holidays, we had a transaction that we're actually working on right now. It's a wire harness manufacturer, and the buyer wants to give them 1 week holiday, and they're used to having 5. And so, and we're negotiating through that right now, but it's just interesting. They want the seller to stay on for 5 more years, 3 to 5 more years, but they only want to give them 1 week's holiday. So it's just kind of funny. You have to work through that. And then this last one here, something often overlooked, is what happens if the person buying your business or the business buying your business gets acquired by someone else. And that happened in a situation where we had an owner that really was looking to stay on long term. And after about 3 years into his 5-year agreement, the business was sold, and the new buyer, he did not like the company that bought him. He didn't like the way they operated. He wanted to get out of his contract, but there were penalties for that. And he had no problem with the penalties when it was going to be the buyer that he expected. But the contract was transferable and didn't have a clause to be able to terminate it upon transfer to a new owner. So it caused a lot of problems for him. So just make sure you have that in place if you end up with a longer term employment agreement. So for step 4, you've kind of gone through this process now that you have a number that you want to hit, you know reason you're leaving, you've looked at different exit strategies, but you really have to think about, okay, what do you want to do after the exit? And sometimes people get trapped in those situations that they're not happy with because they end up finding a buyer that pushes them into a situation that they really weren't expecting to be in. One example is a lot of people want all cash transactions. Well, depending on the buyer, you might need to provide some seller financing, and this can be good or bad depending on the situation. So here's an example. If you have a business and say it's worth $5 million, you get a $4 million downstroke, but then $1 million over 5 years, the interest is nice. And so your total proceeds can be higher, and that can be a good thing as long as the buyer is, going to do a good job running the business, and you're going to make sure you get all of your money and not lose that seller financing. We've had some good cases on this where buyers have not only been able to pay back the note with a lot of interest, but pay it back quicker because it was the right fit. So it's all about the fit in this case. Another situation that you might find yourself in is where the buyer wants to have an earnout. So here's a situation where $5 million transaction, $3 million of it's paid in cash, but they're willing to do $6 million in an earnout. So pay more because it's not cash. And this is common. You can get more for the business if it's an earnout. And so in this case, the proceeds were $9 million. So actually, ended up much better. We've had the situation recently where a company that was a sign manufacturer, they have one large customer that represents 40% of their company, but they've had this customer for a long time. So in their mind, it was not a risk. But unfortunately, the buyers didn't see it that way. So they wanted to do an earnout because they thought the customer was going to leave, or risk that the customer could leave after the transaction happened. Well, the customer didn't leave, they stayed and actually continued to grow with the business. So they ended up getting a really nice earnout payment, and it worked well for everyone. Another role you might play is the role of the consultant. And that's where you stay on and you get paid a pretty hefty consulting fee. And this is expensible to the buyer, so they don't mind sometimes paying very high consulting fees. And also they like to have your expertise. So that could be, part of the transaction, depending on how high the consulting fee is compared to what you're already receiving from the business. But it's definitely something that you can consider in your overall proceeds. And then, as we talked about before with the recapitalization, you could look at you having the cash versus what's called the second bite of the apple. You've heard that before, where you get paid for part of the business, you retain part, and then it ends up being more. We did have this with a chemical manufacturing company. Jason was the owner. Jason wanted to work for the company for several years yet. He wanted to take some chips off the table. So he decided to sell to a private equity group that already had a holding in his space, in the chemical manufacturing space. And it worked out very well, where he was able to basically double the 30% that he retained versus what it was worth originally, and made quite a bit more at the end. Now, it doesn't always work out that way. Obviously, what makes it work is when you're a smaller company, say you're under 5 million EBITDA, your multiples are lower than when you're above 5 million EBITDA. So as the company grew and got bigger, they did more acquisitions, and then they eventually sold it. They sold it for a much higher multiple. In this case, the initial multiple was 6 times for the chemical manufacturing company, but it ended up selling for 12 times once it was grown to a decent size. So now we're down to step 5. This is the point where you've really looked at all of the different options. You've kind of got it down to what you think you want to do, but you want to look at this exit matrix to really kind of pinpoint, what's the ideal exit strategy for you. So the 2 factors that you look at are your willingness to stay on during the transition. And so that, that includes things like the seller financing and the earnouts and employment, consulting, how connected do you want to be to the business and for how long? So that stay on has a variety of meanings. And then, cash proceeds. How important is it to you to maximize those cash proceeds? So when you look at those 2 factors, you can plot out the different exit options and look at what might best work for you. So the sale to a strategic buyer, as most people know, is usually the highest proceeds. So it's usually how you can maximize the amount of money you get for the business. And it also tends to be because strategic buyers already have the knowledge in a certain space. They already have the resources in that space. Typically, it's the quickest way to exit. Typically, they're not requiring as much seller financing or earnouts. It's more cash. And so you can get your cash and you can exit the business. The other end of the spectrum, as far as proceeds, is the fire sale, liquidation, of assets we talked about before. That works, but it's going to be quick and you're not going to have to stay on, but you also get the minimum amount of money for the business. And then recapitalization is kind of over here in the upper right quadrant, where you're looking at both high proceeds, especially with the second bite of the apple we talked about, by retaining some ownership with a buyer that can help grow the business and grow the value. But because of that, you're connected to that business for 3 to 5 years after the sale. So it's a longer time horizon. Management buyout, a lot of people think that's going to be a even though it might not be the highest sale, it's kind of in the middle as far as sale proceeds. And people think that's going to be allow them to leave. But what's been found is it's more common that owners end up having to stay engaged longer than they think. They also a lot of times have to do seller financing to make that work. So just by the case that you have a note out there that could require you to take the business back, a seller note, that also requires you to stay connected. Transferring the kids is another one that, a lot of times you're looking at minimizing proceeds because you're looking at avoiding taxation as much as possible, or minimizing taxation, I should say, to transfer to the kids. But again, being able to exit, depending on how involved the kids are, how trained they are they ready to take over the reins completely? Sometimes it can be very difficult for the owner to just exit the business and go do the things that are pulling them out of the business. And then the hiring a CEO, that's a way to basically exit the business eventually, but it's a long-term plan. So it's more if you just want to get out of the day-to-day, but you're not really going to be free from the business for quite a while. So now we're going to review the 5 steps again. And as we're doing this, if you think of any questions, again, you can hit that Q&A button on your screen, and you can submit whatever questions that you have. Would love to be able to answer any questions that you might have, so please do that. Again, we want to kind of review this and have a chance to answer your questions. So getting clear on why you're exiting, again, making sure that why is there, aligning with your exit type with your why, making sure there's a fit there. Figuring out your number, key, making sure your number is locked in and reasonable. Our goal is to exceed your number, but we got to make sure that it's a number we can't exceed. So that's an important piece. Deciding the life you want post-exit, again, looking at how involved you're going to be. What does that look like? I've heard a lot of owners say, why am I selling if I have to stay involved? And it's true. It's like if you're leaving your business, why do you need to stay involved? Well, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish again. But if you pick on the exit type, you may have to stay involved for quite a while. And that kind of comes down to the last point, which is pinpointing your spot on exit matrix, which is looking at how long are you willing to stay involved versus how much proceeds you're looking to get from the exit. So with that, I'll turn it over to see if you have any questions. I think Tyson or Tammy was going to see if there's any questions that I could answer.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Got a few questions in the hopper here. First one is on the employee thank yous. Does that money go into an escrow account and then get paid? And how long of a time period is the typical stay bonus for?
Great question. Yeah, so the employee thank yous that typically does go into an escrow account because you obviously want to make sure it's used for the intended purpose. Or it's basically part of the sale process that the seller basically is said they're going to pay that, and they keep the funds and do it because it's really from them. But the most common is the escrow account, and it's built into the employment agreement that they have to stay on for a period of time in order to receive those funds. And a lot of times the buyer will contribute or match. So if you're putting $100,000 stay bonus in place and the buyer matches it, then you have $200,000 total for that employee, and it's kind of a joint effort, which is great for your employee. As far as the time frame, the buyer's going to want it as long as possible. They're going to push for 3 years, 5 years, but most of the time what I see is 1 or 2 years because just from an employee standpoint, 5 years is a long time to wait for your bonus, or there's some payout schedule. But you know, I would say minimum is a year, and then the longest usually is I've seen is 5 years.
Okay, great. Thanks, Randy. The next one is, how do you decide what employees to give a bonus to? And should those amounts be different depending on management, non-management, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the key is finding out, well, the key is finding out who the key employees are. So the seller, the buyer is going to want to make sure that whoever is considered a key employee, meaning it's an employee who, if they left, there's definitely going to be a difficult time replacing them. It's going to cause damage to the business. That's who at least the buyer is going to want to see have a stay bonus. Now, as an owner, you may have other people that you want to thank that may not be considered key employee. And so it might be hard to get the buyer to kind of match you with that. So you have to pay that yourself. But if it's a key employee and the buyer agrees that it's really critical they stay, they'll usually match any employee bonus you come up with.
How do you decide if your kids can actually run the business? That's another one we got.
Okay, good question. So, you know, that's one of the challenges of a family transition is a lot of times you don't find out until after they try. So, you know, it ends up either you're getting back involved or you're trying to get them support and training. There are resources for that. There's the Family Business Alliance. There's different groups that kind of specialize in kind of assessing the family members or even management team if it's a management buyout and making sure that they're kind of ready. And I think that would be definitely worth doing if you're considering that. If you would like more information, you know, please let us know. We can send you some of the contacts for that, but I would definitely recommend getting some help assessing their readiness to take over.
And here's another good one. How does NuVescor go about finding strategic buyers or any buyers for that matter?
Yeah, so part of it is that we've been specializing in manufacturing for a lot of years. So over those years, we've collected a huge buyer database. That is part of it. But a lot of M&A firms talk about their database. So that's not unique. What we do is also intensive research, and we find there's always new buyers popping up. There's always there's companies that are now looking to do acquisitions that have never done them before. Matter of fact, we're seeing more new buyers in the marketplace because they're finding it hard to grow organically, and we're entering a slow growth environment, but yet they have capital, they have cash, and so they're looking to acquire other businesses in order to grow. So to find those companies who may not be in any M&A firm's radar, you have to do the research. So we subscribe to some very expensive databases. We scrub through those databases. We actually reach out and call the buyers. We send surveys to the buyers. We have to do the work of the research and the prospecting. A lot of M&A firms rely on their database, but I unfortunately times have changed, and you can't do that anymore to find the best buyers. The buyers in the database tend to be a little more, they've been buying, they've been doing it for years, they're good at it, but they also tend to be more conservative on pricing. They know the ups and downs of the market, and so we're finding them to be they're bringing lower values to the table. So really going out and doing the hard work of finding the right buyer is key.
Randy, how often do contracts include the option/capability to have multiple exit types or a blend of a few?
I'm sorry, what was the beginning of that? How often do contracts, did you say?
Yeah, include the option/capability to have multiple exit types or a blend of a few.
Well, you can structure, I'm not really sure exactly what contract the question's referring to, but as far as the ability to do multiple exit types or a blend of a few, that is common where you may, for example, you may do a management buyout with a private equity group. So you've kind of got a third party sale, but an internal sale at the same time, kind of a hybrid. So that's an example of where that will occur. Or we've done situations where someone wanted to do an ESOP, employee stock ownership plan, but they didn't want to do a full ESOP because they they weren't able, they had to seller finance too much. So we did a blend of a strategic buyer owning part and then having a partial ESOP that eventually that strategic buyer wanted to convert the entire thing to an ESOP. So there's a lot of different ways to structure transactions. So, a hybrid or exit types it's a great question because it's something we see a lot.
Okay. How have you seen charitable planning used in exit planning?
That's a great one. I'm a big fan of doing charitable planning early on in the process. And unfortunately, most owners push back when I mention that and say, well, I'd like to do it after the sale. Well, the problem is after the sale, your options are limited. There's not as much as you can do. You can save a lot more in taxes if you do the planning before you do the sale process and kind of build in that strategy. So unfortunately, I haven't seen it done as often as I would like to see it. Most people, like I said, wait until after the sale is complete. But when I have seen it utilized, it can be very beneficial. There's cases where you can basically avoid tax, minimize tax that would be going to money that be going to pay taxes can actually go to charitable benefit or to nonprofits, and your actual net results can be the same. So, I wouldn't just assume because you're doing charitable planning and giving that you're going to have less money. You can do both. You can give and you can end up with the money you need. And so it's definitely something that owners should look at. They have, again, any nonprofits they like, any charities they like. A great time to figure that out before the sale. If you do it after the sale, you're not going to be able to come out near the same. So I would highly recommend that you do that. And we have, again, resources that specialize in charitable planning that we can connect you with if you're interested.
Randy, how do you counsel business owners who believe that their business is valued way beyond what the market assessment reveals? For example, they want to make more money than the market value.
Yeah, that's a really tough one to do. So I'll give you an example of an owner that we dealt with that I guess what we try to do is we try and get alignment on where we believe the market is based on our market research, based on doing the valuation, based on doing bank analysis. We try and give them as clear a picture as we can as to what the market's going to be like. And then we do that before we move forward. We actually do their tax calculation and everything, get down to the bottom line. And we want to basically say, if this is not going to be within the realm of reasonable to you, and you want way more than that, then really you should not go to market. You should work on the business first. Well, however, sometimes owners don't always tell us the number that they want, or they hold back on that. So we had a situation where an industrial automation company that we were selling, his name was Gary. Gary, we told him that we could get between 6 and 8 million. We showed him all the scenarios. We went to market. We got offers 7, 8 million. We actually got one at 9. We negotiated up to 9.5, and we're thinking, okay, we're doing great because we're higher than we thought at 9.5 million. And then we find out the owner, for whatever reason, decided, nope, I want 10. The minimum is 10. And this is the first time hearing it, even though we brought it up multiple times. So obviously we didn't close. We could not get anyone to $10 million. It was just way too high of a valuation. And so all the buyers went away. And then a year later, so just recently, Gary contacted us and said, man, business is really suffering. Can you go back to those buyers? I'll take whatever I can get. We found out that the business is now worth 3 million. Went back to the buyers. They were hesitant to come back because they felt their time was wasted with Gary, but they did. But then Gary's like, the 3 million isn't enough now. I can't retire on 3 million. So, and I said, well, can you retire on? And he said, well, if I can do 5 million. Well, if you could do 5 million, then why wasn't the 9.5 the right number? And so this goes back to those 5 steps. And, really, we want to make sure that owners share what they need and what they want. And, sometimes we get burned on that because we don't get that as clear as we should, but that's our goal, is to get that before we even go to market.
We've seen some net worth advantages over the last year from inflation in property value and asset in some assets, but business net worths have not seemed to increase. Higher wages and overhead costs are diminishing annual EBITDA numbers. Are you seeing businesses selling for less due to this as compared to 4 or 5 years ago? I feel like my business value is parallel with my 401k diminishing. Can you comment?
Hmm, I agree. It's been unfortunate. I just mentioned that case with Gary. I've got 4 other cases like that where owners have come back after they had a high expectation and their business value is diminished. Some of the liquidations sales I told you, I was talking about, were situations where the asset values, as you mentioned, have gone way up. So their equipment value is higher, but their profits were getting squeezed, their overhead costs, they weren't able to keep up with pricing increases. And so their margins are getting compressed. So their overall goodwill is shrinking. And so we're definitely seeing that in a lot of different companies right now. And so the ones that are doing well, that have been able to increase their pricing and be able to keep their margins, they're so few and far between that when buyers find them, they're willing to pay a pretty good premium because there's obviously something special about that business. The niche it's in or the situation it's in allows it to maintain their margins, allows them to continue to, maintain profitability, even growth, given the environment we're in. So we're seeing higher multiples for companies like that, but the companies that are seeing compressed margins and profits are getting low multiples. So you got the double hit, right? You got the lower multiple and you got the lower EBITDA to times it by. So it's a real issue in the industry right now, in the M&A industry is dealing with that.
How does NuVescor view patents that protect key IP of a company? And how do they value patents?
So patents are kind of back to what I said about the niche and having something unique. If a buyer sees a patent as a way to maintain competitiveness in a marketplace, which is getting extremely competitive, again, with rising prices, compressed margins, if that patent can help overcome some of those issues, then there's a really high value to those patents. If it's a patent for a concept that hasn't been marketed yet or doesn't have market traction, and there's no proof of what it can do as far as sales and profitability, then it's hard to value. It doesn't have near as much value to it. So you got to have some proof to what the patent can produce in terms of sales and margins and income. And then if the buyer can take that patent and through their distribution networks and their connections really run with it and expand it, then you're going to get it. You can get a really nice value for it done on. You can do more forecasting with it. You can do this kind of cash flow model to come up with your value. So it just depends on the patent situation, but obviously patents are a good thing to have for protecting competitiveness, and that's why you can get more for it and base it on projections versus just historical.
Okay, got one more question here. Randy, when I sell my house, I list on MLS. Is there something similar for businesses to broaden the reach for potential buyers?
Great question. So, one of the mistakes that a lot of sellers make is they try and sell it themselves. And I know that might sound self-serving that since we do M&A work, but what I mean by that is, it's really hard for them to keep confidentiality when they're doing the sales themselves, because as soon as they start talking to 1 or 2 buyers, even though they have them sign non-disclosure agreements, it's hard to contain that the word doesn't spread. So one of the things that a good M&A advisor does is they make sure that the buyer doesn't know who the seller is until they can vet them out, make sure they're capable of doing a transaction, make sure that this is the right fit, at least conceptually, without them knowing who the seller is, but just what they're looking for is a fit, that the seller knows who they are ahead of time, understands if the fit, and then approves that they can get confidence information. So we may go through 30, 50, 100 buyers and only have a handful that actually, get to the point where they're getting confidential information. And that's the goal. Keep the people who are getting exposure to the business as minimal as possible, but the M&A advisor has to do that work to do that screening. And so there are places like MLS that you can post advertisements for business for sale. We use those, even though those don't usually generate the best results, but we don't put in information about who the seller is. We put descriptions of the type of business, it's electronics manufacturing, this general size range, things like that. So you keep it confidential. We do our calling on companies, buyers. We say we have a company in your industry that we think would be a good fit for you, but we find out more about the buyer than we do tell them about the seller. So it's really in the technique of how you maintain confidentiality, but definitely putting it out there public is very damaging, and trying to talk to a bunch of buyers yourself can be very damaging.
All right. Got one more here, Randy.
Okay.
We are moving from a product and service company to a licensing company. How will that affect valuation?
Interesting. So if you end up taking the value builder survey, which I mentioned earlier, one of the factors that really drives valuation is reoccurring revenue. So if your licensing proves to be able to provide a reoccurring revenue stream and you can grow that revenue stream, that's actually going to increase your valuation and your ability to get a lot of buyers interested in your company. So I think it's a good move to go to licensing, as long as you can generate that reoccurring revenue on a contractual basis. So I would say that, that's probably the right direction to go. You'd have to look at what your EBITDA is going to be before and after the transition as well, because it's a multiple of that, but you will get a higher multiple on that reoccurring licensing model.
Okay, I think that was it for questions. So I think Tammy's
Great.
going to close it out now.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your questions.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you so much for joining us today. Excellent questions. Really appreciate that. Randy, if you can go to the next slide. So we will be sending to your email address that you provided the exit checklist workbook, which kind of goes over a lot of the things that Randy talked about today, but it's meant to be an interactive tool for you to work through some of those steps. And then also, as Randy mentioned, we'll be sending a link to the Value Builder survey. And if you fill that out, we will get some reports that we can meet with you one-on-one video, do a virtual meeting. We can meet with you and kind of go over what the results of those questionnaires are. I also thought, as Randy was answering one of the questions about value, or actually, I think, Randy, when you were giving an example of someone that got the offers up to 9.5 and then didn't take them, and then figured out, he needed 5 million to live off of. I thought the Value Builder system that we subscribe to, they have another resource called the Freedom Score. So we'll also include a link to the Freedom Score, and that's another questionnaire for you to fill out, and it kind of gives you, we'll get a report that will help give you an idea of what you would need to retire on. So what's your freedom score? So we'll send that as well. Yeah, again, thanks for joining us today. If you have questions that we can answer one-on-one, please reach out. You can send Randy an email. You can also use his Calendly link to set up an intro call. You can also go to NuVescor's website and hit the contact button to get in touch with us that way. And yeah, we hope you'll reach out so we can answer any further questions. And really, at the end of the day, we would love to help you on your journey to exit. So you can never start too early in planning, even if you're not ready to do it for a few years. Start thinking about it now. As Randy said at the beginning, it's never too early to start thinking about your exit, and it's never too early to start talking to us on how we can help you. So reach out. We would love to help you. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.